Chile, land of barren deserts, land of ancient peoples, land of wind and millennia-old glaciers. An absolute silence wraps around the dunes of a lifeless desert. A glacier creaks in the Patagonian wind. The ocean crashes against a coastline that never ends. Welcome to Chile. Welcome to the longest and narrowest country in the world. Stretching 4,300 kilometers, or about 2,670 miles from north to south, this is a place where the driest desert on Earth meets the glaciers of Patagonia, and where stone statues watch over the horizon on a remote island in the Pacific. But let's start from the beginning. Chile stretches along the western edge of South America, squeezed between the Andes Mountains to the east and the Pacific Ocean to the west. The Andes are not just a natural border with Argentina, but a constant presence, shaping the climate, water resources, and cultural identity of the entire country. But this elongated shape of the nation creates something truly unique in the world. A climatic diversity unlike anywhere else. To the north, the Atacama Desert dominates the landscape like a planet of its own. It is the driest desert on Earth. So dry that in some areas no rain has been recorded for centuries. Its soil is so similar to that of Mars that NASA uses it to test instruments designed for the Red Planet. Here life seems impossible, but if you travel to the opposite extreme, deep into the south, the landscape flips entirely. Chilean Patagonia is a world of glaciers, fjords, and relentless winds, where nature preserves one of its most pristine forms. In fact, the Asen region has a population density of less than 1 person per square kilometer, or less than about 3 people per square mile. And some areas can only be reached by sea or by crossing into Argentina because no internal roads connect them to the rest of the country. But Chile is not just a country of climatic extremes. It is also a seismic land. Very seismic. Sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire, it has over 2,000 volcanoes, many of which are still active. In 1960, it recorded the most powerful earthquake ever measured in history with a magnitude of 9.5 on the Richter scale. And it is precisely this centuries-old coexistence with earthquakes that has also shaped the architecture, such as in the South. Here, traditional houses are built with wood instead of masonry, specifically to absorb the shaking better. Moving on, this nation also has thousands of kilometers or thousands of miles of Pacific coastline, and cities like Valparaíso live off the sea, fishing, and trade. Fish and seafood are fundamental to Chilean cuisine, a bond with the ocean that defines the daily life of millions of people. The country's isolation, squeezed between ocean, desert, mountains, and ice, has also protected something else: the vineyards. Chile is world famous today for its wines, particularly Carmenere, a grape variety that nearly vanished in Europe because of insects and that found a second life here. The stable climate and natural barriers protect the vines from many diseases, turning the central Chilean valleys into one of the purest winemaking regions on the planet. And speaking of isolation, no place embodies that word better than Easter Island. Rapa Nui sits over 3,500 kilometers, or about 2,175 miles from the Chilean coast in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. Its moai, the famous stone statues, remain to this day an archaeological enigma that time has not been able to solve. Back on the mainland, in the south of the country, indigenous traditions are still deeply alive. The Mapuche people maintain their own culture, their own language, and a visceral connection with the land that continues to strongly influence contemporary Chilean identity. Chile, then, is far more than just a nation. It is an entire world, compressed into an impossible shape. A place that continues to tell its ancient story to anyone who visits. But now let's discover the most incredible places in this country. Atacama Desert. This is the driest place on Earth. In some areas, it hasn't rained for centuries, and it is precisely this total absence of moisture that makes it unique. The soil, stripped of all vegetation, exposes geological layers millions of years old, readable like open pages. During the day, the silence is total. At night, the absence of clouds and light pollution turns the sky into a natural observatory. It is no coincidence that NASA chose this desert to test instruments designed for Mars, because the ground conditions are nearly identical to those of the red planet. Among the most spectacular points of the desert is the Valley of the Moon, where wind and salt have sculpted the rock for millions of years, until creating a landscape so alien, it looks like the surface of another planet. Rising in elevation instead to 4,300 meters, or about 14,100 feet, the Tadio geysers remind us that beneath this dry earth, the underground is still alive. Over 80 fumaroles erupt, where boiling water meets freezing air, forming the largest geothermal field in the southern hemisphere. Easter Island. Lost in the Pacific Ocean, this is one of the most isolated inhabited places on the planet. And it is precisely this isolation that shaped everything. The Rapa Nui people, who arrived from Polynesia around the year 1000, developed a completely self-sufficient civilization. The Moai, the famous statues carved from dark stone, were not decorations here. They represented deified ancestors and were positioned with their gaze turned inward toward the island to protect the villages. The only exception is Ahu Akivi. These are 7 moai that face the ocean, oriented exactly at the point where the sun sets during the equinox. Almost all the moai were carved from the volcanic tuff of Ranararaku, the crater that served as both quarry and open-air workshop. Transporting them for kilometers, without wheels or draft animals, remains an enigma that archaeologists are still trying to solve. Torres del Paine National Park. Three granite spires, nearly 3,000 meters, or about 9,800 feet tall, pierce the clouds of Chilean Patagonia. The name means Towers of Blue Paine in the language of the Tehuelche, the indigenous people of the region. And they were formed from a mass of magma that millions of years ago rose from deep underground without ever reaching the surface, solidifying below the earth. Over time, ice stripped away the outer layers and left exposed that granite core that we see today. At the foot of the towers, the landscape changes every few kilometers. There are turquoise lakes fed by glaciers, forests of native beech trees, and wind-battered steppes where guanacos roam, the wild cousins of llamas. The W Circuit, which is the park's main trekking route, crosses all of these environments in roughly 4 to 5 days. Valparaíso. This city was never planned. It grew on its own, climbing up 42 hills that overlook the Pacific. In the 19th century, it was the main port on the route between the Atlantic and Pacific, and every ship rounding Cape Horn would stop here. Then the Panama Canal changed the trade routes and the city lost its strategic role. But that decline preserved something rare. An urban fabric that remained intact, made of colorful corrugated metal houses, still functioning funicular elevators, and narrow stairways connecting the port to the hills. Today, Valparaíso is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the center of the Chilean art scene, with murals covering entire neighborhoods. Marble caves. On General Carrera Lake, at the border between Chile and Argentina, water has been carving into the marble for over 6,000 years. The result is caves, tunnels, and columns of polished rock that change color depending on the season. When the lake is fed by glacial meltwater, the water turns an intense turquoise, and the marble walls reflect the light, creating an almost miraculous effect. They can only be reached by boat because the formation rises directly from the water. The name Cathedral comes from the shape of the natural vaults, which resemble naves and arches. Santiago. Six million people live wedged between the Andes and the Cordillera de la Costa. Santiago sits in a natural basin And this position explains everything. The climate, the smog that in winter gets trapped between the mountains, but also the incredible view that opens from any high point in the city. The historic center blends colonial buildings and glass skyscrapers without any contradiction. The La Staria and Bella Vista neighborhoods, which are the hubs of cultural life, developed alongside Cerro San Cristobal, a hill nearly 900 meters, or about 2,950 feet high, that cuts the city in two. Santiago is not a postcard capital, but it is a city that works, practical, where everyday Chilean life is visible without any filters. Carretera Austral. (1,200 kilometers, or about 745 miles of road, sometimes unpaved, through Chilean Patagonia. This road has existed only since 1988, because before then, this part of Chile could be reached only by sea or from Argentina. Building it took 20 years of work in extreme conditions, through fjords, rainforests, and unstable volcanic terrain. The result is a route that changes landscape every few hours. You'll find glaciers descending close enough to nearly touch the road, lakes of a vivid turquoise fed by meltwater, and villages of a few hundred inhabitants, born as frontier outposts. It is one of the last roads in the world where driving still means crossing a wild and nearly untouched territory. Chiloé Island. An island nearly as large as Corsica, separated from the mainland by a channel just a few kilometers or miles wide. The vegetation is that of a temperate rainforest, dense and evergreen, fed by rains that arrive from the Pacific almost every day. This physical separation produced something rare, a culture parallel to mainstream Chilean culture, with its own traditions, mythology, and architecture. The wooden churches, 16 in total and all UNESCO World Heritage Sites, were built between the 17th and 18th centuries by Jesuit missionaries, together with local communities using only timber from the surrounding forests and a joinery system with no nails. The Palafitos of Castro, the main town, sit over the water, because at one time fishermen needed direct access to the sea to do their work. Everything on this island has a practical reason even when the result is poetic. Osorno Volcano. A perfect cone rises to 2,752 meters, or about 9,028 feet above Lake Lankihu in the Chilean Lake District. Its regular shape is the result of continuous eruptions, the last one in 1869, which deposited lava evenly across all slopes, layer after layer. The summit is covered in ice year-round, and in winter it becomes a ski resort. At the base, however, the landscape is completely different. There are forests of coigüe, an evergreen tree native to southern Chile, and waterfalls fed by glacial meltwater. Osorno dominates the horizon from any point in the area, and it is the visual landmark of an entire region. Viña del Mar. They call it the Garden City, and it's a name it earned on its own merits. Viña del Mar is right next to Valparaíso, but the contrast could not be sharper. Where Valparaíso is chaos and steep hills, Viña is orderly boulevards, manicured gardens, and buildings lining the waterfront. Born in the late 19th century as a summer retreat for wealthy families, it grew around the concept of leisure. The municipal casino, for example, which opened in 1930, was one of the first in South America. Even today, it is above all a beach town, with wide sandy shores, restaurants on the Pacific, and a floral clock that has become its most photographed symbol. Bahía Inglesa. The name is certainly misleading. The English actually have nothing to do with it. The name comes from a British pirate ship that in the 17th century found shelter in this bay in northern Chile. The water here is transparent and calm, which is rare along the Pacific coast, normally cold and rough because of the Humboldt Current. The difference is the rocky formation, which shields the bay from the currents and from the wind. The result is a strip of white beaches in the middle of the Atacama Desert, where the arid landscape ends directly at the shore. No vegetation, no trees, just sand, rock, and an ocean that seems out of place. Puerto Varas. It was born from the German colonization of southern Chile in the mid-19th century. The Chilean government offered land to European settlers to populate a region that at the time was nothing but dense forest and rain. The Germans arrived, cleared the land, and built a small town that to this day still has steep-roofed houses, pastry shops with German cakes, and a craft beer that descends directly from the original recipes. Lake Lanquihue, on which the town sits, is the second largest lake in Chile. 160 square kilometers, or about 62 square miles of fresh water, with the Osorno Volcano in the background. Here, European culture grafted itself onto the Patagonian landscape without erasing it. Embalse El Yeso. Two and a half hours from Santiago, the road climbs up to nearly 3,000 meters, or about 9,800 feet in elevation, and arrives at an artificial reservoir surrounded by Andean mountains. Embalse means dam in Spanish, and indeed this lake was built in the 1960s to guarantee drinking water for the capital. But the color of the water, an intense turquoise caused by minerals dissolved in the Andean ice, turned a water infrastructure project into one of the most popular day trips in central Chile. In winter, snow covers everything. In summer instead, the meltwater fills the reservoir, and the contrast between dark rock and turquoise surface becomes sharp, almost unreal. Caleta Tortel. No roads, no cars. Here, you move on wooden walkways made of cypress. This village of 500 inhabitants is nestled among the fjords of Patagonia at a point where the Carretera Austral ends and the territory becomes accessible only by water. The walkways stretch for roughly 8 kilometers, or about 5 miles in total, and connect the houses suspended between the forest and the sea. The town was founded as a base camp for the loggers harvesting Guaytica cypress, a wood resistant to moisture that grows only in this area. Tortel exists because that wood exists. Pucón. Living at the foot of an active volcano requires a certain kind of character. This small town is built on the shore of Lake Villarrica, with the smoking crater of the volcano by the same name, just 15 kilometers, or about 9 miles away. The last eruption was in 2015, and evacuation plans are part of the town's routine. And yet nobody leaves, quite the opposite. The combination of lake, volcano, and araucaria forest has made the town the outdoor capital of Chile. It is a small but lively center with a handful of colorful streets where Mapuche artisan shops alternate with trekking gear stores. The restaurants smoke meat with lenga wood, and life revolves around the water and the mountain. Valle Nevado. Just 60 kilometers, or about 37 miles from Santiago, the road climbs through 40 switchbacks up to 3,000 meters, or about 9,800 feet in elevation. Valle Nevado is the largest ski resort in the Southern Hemisphere, with over 40 runs spread across 900 hectares, or about 2,220 acres. It operates on the opposite schedule from European resorts because the season runs from June to October, and this attracts professional athletes from the Northern Hemisphere who can train here during their summer. In the off-season instead, the same slopes become hiking and mountain biking trails with views of the Andean range. Lake Ranco. Mass tourism has not arrived here. Lake Ranco, in the rivers region of southern Chile, covers an area of over 400 square kilometers, or about 154 square miles, but remains outside the international tourist circuits. And the reason is simple: there is no large city on its shores. There are only rural communities, farms, and forests of ulmo and koigi that reach all the way to the water's edge. At the center of the lake rises Huapi Island, inhabited by a Mapuche community, the indigenous people of south-central Chile, who maintain their own traditions and language. Punta Arenas. 125,000 people live facing the Strait of Magellan at the point where the American continent narrows until it ends. Punta Arenas is one of the southernmost cities in the world, and the wind here is a daily fact of life. The city was founded as a penal colony and a stopover for ships heading toward the Pacific. The downtown area preserves late 19th century buildings, built by Croatian and British wool merchants, with colorful facades that resist the wind, and a Plaza de Armas, where the cypresses grow bent, all in the same direction. Concón. "12 kilometers, or about 7.5 miles of coastline, constant wind, and waves that roll in long from the Pacific." This is the surf capital of Chile, thanks to a bay that is oriented to receive the northwest swells without obstacles. And then the sandy bottom creates regular waves, suitable for all skill levels. Out of the water, though, Concón has another identity. The empanadas of this coastal town are famous throughout Chile, to the point that there is an area where dozens of frying shops compete for the top spot. The reason is the proximity to the port of Valparaíso, which for centuries guaranteed cheap fresh fish, and the empanadas de mariscos, stuffed with seafood, became the local specialty. Hornopiren. The Carretera Austral comes to a halt here. Hornopiren is the last town reachable by road, before the fjords break the continuity of the land and force you onto a ferry. This role as a boundary defines everything. The town is small, with just a few hundred inhabitants, surrounded by wet Valdivian rainforests and the Hornopiren volcano, which gives its name to the entire area. The national park of the same name protects one of the still intact areas of Alerce. The Alerce is a conifer that can live over 3,000 years and grows only in southern Chile and Argentina. Here you can find specimens 2,000 years old with trunks as wide as 4 meters, or about 13 feet. Radal Siete Tazas National Park. A forest of native Chilean deciduous trees covers a terrain of volcanic origin that in autumn ignites in red, orange, and yellow. The Claro River crosses the entire park, but at one specific point it has eroded the basalt into a stepped formation. It took millennia, but 7 natural pools were carved out, one below the other, where each taza, as the Spanish word indicates, collects the water before letting it fall into the next. The color in the pools is turquoise, a sharp contrast with the dark rock of the riverbed. La Serena. Founded in 1544, it is the second oldest city in Chile. Despite that, its current appearance tells the story of another era. In the 1950s, in fact, President González Videla, who was born right here, funded an urban development plan that redesigned the city center in a neo-colonial style, with white facades, arcades, and stone bell towers. The result is a city that looks older than it actually is. Part of that same plan is the monumental lighthouse, built in 1951 at the entrance of Avenida del Mar, the waterfront boulevard that connects the city to nearby Coquimbo. The lighthouse no longer functions as a navigation aid, but it remains the visual landmark of the city. Petrohué River. The water here is emerald green. Not because of the light, but because of the volcanic minerals that the river picks up as it flows along the slopes of the Osorno Volcano. This river is born from Lake Todos los Santos and runs only 36 kilometers, or about 22 miles, before emptying into a fjord. But in that stretch, it crosses a landscape that changes constantly. The main rapids form where solidified lava created barriers of black basaltic rock. The water slams against them, splits apart, and comes back together. All around there is forest of corgi and other native shrubs of this humid region. Geometrica's hot springs. In the middle of a rainforest, a crack in the volcanic rock hides 17 thermal pools. The water rises from underground at nearly 80 degrees Celsius, or about 176 degrees Fahrenheit, and is channeled into stone basins connected by a red wooden walkway, 600 meters, or about 1,970 feet long. The project is by Chilean architect Germán del Sol, who designed everything to disturb the surrounding environment as little as possible. The steam mixes with the humid forest air, the trees cover the pools from above, and the background sound is that of a stream running along the bottom of the gorge. Maitencillo. A long coastal stretch, suspended between hills and the ocean, about 150 kilometers from Santiago. This proximity to the capital sealed its fate, and today, in fact, it is the weekend getaway for Santiago residents. The colorful houses climb up the rock, connected by steep little stairways that descend toward coves sheltered from the wind. The coast, however, is not one continuous beach, but a sequence of inlets separated by rock formations, each with a different character. Tongoy. Two bays, a peninsula, and a wind that never stops. Tongoy is a fishing village in the semi-arid strip between the Atacama Desert and the Central Zone. The peninsula divides the coast into two beaches with opposite conditions. Playa Socos, facing north, is calm and sheltered. Playa Grande, facing south, takes the full force of the Humboldt Current and stays cold all year long. The economy revolves around oyster and scallop farming, favored precisely by the nutrient-rich waters carried in by the cold current. Lake Colbún. A dam created this lake in 1985. Before, there was a river valley. Today, there are 60 square kilometers, or about 23 square miles, of fresh water surrounded by dry hills and vineyards. The Colbún hydroelectric plant is one of the largest in the country, and the artificial lake that powers it has completely transformed the local economy. Where before only wheat was grown, now there are water sports, fishing, and rural tourism. Bahá'í Temple. On the hills of Santiago's eastern outskirts, a translucent structure opens toward the sky. The Bahá'í Temple of South America, inaugurated in 2016, is composed of 9 wings of marble and glass that at night glow from within, visible from much of the city. The shape is not random. In the Bahá'í faith, 9 represents unity, and each door symbolizes one of the world's great religions. Anyone here can enter, regardless of their religion, because it is a principle written into the Bahá'í sacred scriptures themselves. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . There are no rituals. There are no priests. There are no symbols on the walls. Only silence and natural light filtering through the alabaster ribs. Wrapping up this visual journey through Chile, we have traveled from the driest desert on Earth to the glaciers of Patagonia, exploring together not just places, but also the stories that make every corner of this country unique. We hope the images and stories shared have enriched your knowledge and sparked the desire to personally explore the extraordinary variety of this land.